All right, so that takes care of our Hubert texture, but what about the HDR? Remember, the HDR is 32 bits, and back to when I talked about the whole ICC profile, because of the fact that this is 32 bits, it goes by a different set of rules. In other words, the ICC is not baked into the file like it is with a JPEG. So it's incorrect to drag that over and call this a utility texture sRGB. Even though it looks like, there's an ICC profile that we need to strip away or get rid of. Again, because this is an EXR, it goes by different rules. We don't need to strip away that ICC profile because when Redshift brings in a linear file, it's going to not pay attention to that profile anyway. So what we need to do here is say utility linear sRGB. Linear means that we are not trying to remove an sRGB transformation. So we apply that to all. This again will take our color primaries and bring that over to ACES CG. When this particular photo was shot, it was shot using sRGB primaries. And so we don't have that big old wide range unless we convert it. And after doing so, we end up with a different result. So let's save that image right there. And then over here in the object level, let's go ahead and load in that ACES CG and see what that does. Okay, now the difference here is very subtle, but let's say we zoom in on these colors over here. This mainly affects the saturation. So this is before, things are overly saturated. This is after. This is the correct visual saturation. I'll go back and forth so you can see this. But basically, you need to be sure that whenever you use an HDR, that you're going through that particular process. Now, what's great is that at this point, you pretty much have everything you need. So we now have a linear workflow. We're not double applying that gamma anymore. Our bounced light is going to work really well now. So I have this card right here. It's basically a grid that is being used for bounced light. So we can kind of see this right here. I basically have a texture map that's bouncing light onto Hubert based on the HDR. So if we add in this guy, this is what we'll get. And now that we're working with the proper color space, we also get a better results with the bounced lights. And on top of that, once we start adding in, let's say, the face key, the rim right here, this all starts coming together rather quickly. So let's bring down that exposure just a tad bit, like so. And last but not least, we can add an HDR just for the backdrop right there so that we separate that from the main lights. And we can go through here and mess around with some of these other controls like exposure. We can add another LUT here for artistic purposes. So maybe add a little bit of that contrast soft. And then also we can go to bloom, flare, streak, etc., and just dial that in so that it looks way better. So let's now check out the difference between ugly Hubert and beautiful Hubert. This is ugly Hubert, and this is beautiful. And wow, what a massive, massive difference that is. I mean, these two images are so different, you can barely even compare them. Hopefully that gives you an idea of why this stuff is super important. This is why I mentioned that good color management is the difference between a professional render and an amateur one. And the combination of ACES and linear workflow will get you to this better results. Now, I want to point out one thing that happened with our backdrop. Let's actually go back to our render here and turn off the depth of field. So we'll see the backdrop. And what you'll notice is that the quality of this backdrop went way, way down. And so to give you an idea, okay, I had this AK JPEG that I brought through Pico. So, you know, that's this large JPEG. I brought it through Pico. I did the whole, you know, sRGB thing. And now the quality is absolutely garbage. So in the next video, I want to talk about why that is. I also want to introduce you to a few more technical terms that'll help you research the topic more. And we'll go from there.